Please pay attention. Brajanath is asking, I understand that sadhu sangha is the only sukriti, sukriti means pious activity, that gives rise to bhakti. In other words, how do you get bhakti? What gives rise to it? I understand that sadhu sangha is the only sukriti that gives rise to bhakti. One has to listen to Harikatha from the mouths of sadhus, and thereafter one obtains bhakti. Is this the proper sequence to progress in bhakti? And so Babaji says, I will explain the proper way of progressing in bhakti. Listen attentively. Only by good fortune does the jiva, who is wandering throughout the universe, achieve the sukriti that gives rise to bhakti. One of the many limbs of pure bhakti may touch a jiva's life. For example, he may fast on Ekadasi, or touch or visit the holy places of Bhagavan's pastimes, or serve a guest who happens to be a Shuddha Bhakta, or have the chance to hear Harinam or Harikatha from the lotus mouth of an Akinchana Bhakta. If someone desires material benefits or impersonal liberation from such activities, the resultant sukriti does not lead to devotional service. However, if an innocent person performs any of these activities, either unknowingly or out of habit, without desiring material sense gratification or impersonal liberation, these activities lead to the accumulation of bhakti, prada, sukriti. If you don't understand, don't worry, because I'm going to explain it, so you can just listen. Yeah, you don't need the book. But I think Sundarup has the book, so he would ask me what page. After accumulating such sukriti for many births, it becomes concentrated enough to give faith in pure bhakti, and when faith in bhakti is undivided, one develops a desire to associate with Shuddha Bhaktas. By association, one becomes engaged in performing sadhana and bhajana, and this leads to the removal of anarthas in proportion to the purity of chanting. When anarthas are removed, the previous faith is purified further to become nishtha, firm faith. This firm faith is also purified to become ruchi, spiritual taste, and by the wonderful effect of bhakti, this ruchi is strengthened and takes the form of a sakti, transcendental attachment. Transcendental attachment matures into rati or bhava, which joins with the ingredients of sthayi bhava and becomes rasa, the nectarian mellows of prema. This is the step-by-step progression in the development of Krishna prema. So, I'm going to explain all this. Question is being asked here. He's asking, I understand that sadhu sangha is the only sukriti, sukriti means piety, that gives rise to bhakti. One has to listen to Harikatha from the mouths of sadhus, and thereafter one obtains bhakti. Is this the proper sequence? So, there are two kinds of sukriti. There's sukriti and bhakti, and there's ordinary sukriti. So, if you do something pious that's not in relation to bhakti, pious may mean you give charity, it's described in the Vedas, you dig wells, you plant trees, you do things for the welfare of people, that's also called sukriti. It's not bhakti sukriti. Whereas in bhakti sukriti, you'll do some devotional service in some way, either physically do service, or you'll hear from a sadhu, or you'll chant the holy name, you'll take prasadam, you'll even see a sadhu. There are different, anything connected with Krishna consciousness. And you don't have to be a devotee, you don't even have to know what you're doing. It's just that you've come in touch with a devotee, and thereby you offer the opportunity to do devotional service. So, what this is saying is that to develop faith, enough faith to begin the process of Krishna consciousness, you require a certain amount of sukriti. If you don't have enough sukriti in devotional service, you won't develop the faith. If you don't develop the faith, you won't begin the process. And this is very practical, and if you've ever tried to help people become Krishna conscious, especially in America or Western countries, you'll see they have little faith, so you have to build faith. And so what is being explained here is, how do they get this faith? How do they get the sukriti? A person may have no sukriti, no bhakti sukriti, and if he has no bhakti sukriti, then he's not going to be able to develop enough faith to begin engaging in devotional service. So how do they develop bhakti sukriti? We engage them some way. Take a book, take prasadam, come to our temple, listen to our class, engage in service. We engage them in these activities, and this is bhakti sukriti. And when it hits us, what's being explained here is, when it hits a certain point where it accumulates, then enough faith will develop that one will be willing to associate with devotees, hear from them, and then when faith further develops, one will begin the process. And then Krishna consciousness is the development of that faith. As faith increases, one develops to the next level, where one begins to not only steadily do the process, but become purified of anarthas and become steady in Krishna consciousness. So this verse is explaining there's different stages. You can read about these stages in the Nectar Devotion and in Prabhupada's books. But it begins with faith. So an interesting question comes up. You've probably thought of this. Why somebody becomes a devotee, or someone is interested in Krishna consciousness, or someone takes to it on some level, even if not fully, and somebody else doesn't. And so Prabhupada was asked this question, and he said, because they're fortunate. And so then the question was asked, well, how does one become fortunate? And Prabhupada said, we created their good fortune. So this is what we're discussing is what Prabhupada meant. We create their good fortune by engaging them in devotional service. So you go back to that same point. If you engage in enough devotional service, it builds up, builds up, builds up. And then hits a certain point that you can hear from the sadhu and apply. So now Sundar Rupa is asking a question. In India, people fixed on faith by their parents or society find it difficult to change that. How does this work then? It works mostly by hearing. And somehow or other, if you can engage people in Krishna consciousness in some way, if you can engage them, and gradually the faith will change, because in India people have faith. They may have faith in demigods or whatever it is they have faith in, but usually that faith is usually handed down from their parents or relatives. It's not cultivated through knowledge. So just like us as Americans, we didn't have any faith, so our faith was built by knowledge, by hearing from Prabhupada. So in a similar way, if they're open to hear, then gradually faith and bhakti will develop. That's how it works. So that's what this verse is saying. Somebody will hear from a sadhu, or they'll chant Hare Krishna, just engage them. I mean, a lot of times people will just come to the temple, not with the best of intentions, but they'll come, and then so they'll engage. And you say, "Could you help me with this? I need a little help. Can you help me carry this? Or could you help me clean this?" Anything they do, any service, that's bhakti sukriti. Now, one thing that's being said here is that it shouldn't be done with a material motive. So, but most people don't even know what devotional service is and why they're doing it, and we just engage them in it. And so it's a bank account, we're building their bank account of devotional service, and then when it hits a certain point, then they'll become steady. So, it works the same for us. The more devotional service you do, the more you hear and chant, more you study, the more you associate. It's building up this bhakti sukriti. And that helps you develop your faith and ultimately it helps you develop your steadiness. Well, what's interesting is that what we're seeing here is that before you begin devotional service, even when you don't know anything about it, if you do bhakti in any way, it helps you become fortunate enough to receive the mercy. And after you receive the mercy, you still do the same thing. You still do the same activities, because these activities always help. Now, of course, some people are coming from a past life and they've done that. But it was interesting on this morning walk, because this whole concept of who gets the mercy, one who's fortunate, and how do they become fortunate? We are their good fortune. That was Prabhupada's answer to that question. He said, we are their good fortune. We means you, me, all the devotees who somehow present Krishna consciousness to people. We are their good fortune. So there's a nice meditation if you think, I can do something to help somebody become Krishna conscious by giving them prasadam, by inviting them to a program, giving them a DVD, a book, something. If somebody reads a book, that's also bhakti sukriti. It's just, look at, so Sushma was a worshipper of Durga. Many people in India worship Durga. I went to Mauritius, and in Mauritius, when the devotees first came there, there were practically no Krishna bhaktas. It was an island of Shiva bhaktas, and now there are many, many devotees of Krishna. So, as people hear the holy name, they get prasadam, they hear the philosophy. This bhakti sukriti is building, and it builds to a certain point where they're going to actually engage in a regular way in devotional service. That's the process, and that's what's being explained here. And then when you engage regularly, then the process of anartha-vritti begins, and you start becoming purified. And then when you become purified sufficiently, you become steady, because the anarthas are no longer bothering you. And then the next stage after steadiness is you become attached. You get a taste. Actually like serving Krishna. It's relishable. And then from that you become attached. So you're not just serving Krishna because you get pleasure, but there's a relationship that you're attached to, and you're stimulated by the relationship. And then bhava develops. And bhava is the preliminary stage of love of Krishna. And the stage of bhava ecstasies develop. And that was explained here a little bit. Beginning of ecstatic devotional service. And on the stage of prema, then pure love of Krishna. It's fully manifest. So if you have questions, you can ask it. Let me continue reading. The principal idea is that when people with sufficient sukriti have darshan of Shuddha Bhaktas, they develop an inclination to proceed on the path of bhakti. So now, really important point that's being made here is the pure devotees are a necessary part of bringing people to Krishna consciousness. There has to be pure devotees on the planet, because what did we just read? By getting the association, people with sufficient sukriti have darshan of Shuddha Bhaktas, they develop an inclination to proceed on the path of bhakti. So, pure devotees are necessary. Now, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada describes the same point, but he adds something to it by saying that all the devotees in our movement should be pure devotees. Because that way, people will get the association of pure devotees. Now, many of us don't understand what Prabhupada meant here by pure devotees, because When we read pure devotee, we can go through Prabhupada's books and see descriptions of pure devotees. And descriptions of pure devotees are usually very, very elevated. So when we say, Sushma, you should be a pure devotee, or Pallavi, you should be a pure devotee, then you say, well, that's crazy, So, Pallavi, we need you to give association. We need you to be a pure devotee. Sushma, we need you to give association to others who are coming. Rati Kali Rata, we need you to be a pure devotee. And you're saying, but I'm not a pure devotee. I don't know if I'll ever be a pure devotee. And so this instruction can't relate to me. No, so it does relate to you, and we have to, let me explain why. There are two things to understand, and if you're distracted now, just pay attention, because this is very important and it relates to many things in Krishna consciousness. There's a difference between engaging in pure devotional service and being on the platform of pure devotional service. Or I could restate that by saying there's a difference between engaging in pure devotional service and being a pure devotee. If we take the highest definition of pure devotee, then we say he's a Mahabhagavat, he's an Uttam Adhikari. We could say he's seeing Krishna. Krishna's speaking to him directly. We can take that definition of a pure devotee. Krishna is speaking to him. He sees Krishna. He cannot fall down. There's no Maya in his life. He has not even the thought ever enters his mind of doing anything separate from Krishna. So that's one definition of pure devotee. And the pure devotees always thinking of Krishna 24 hours a day, never forgets him for a moment. So these are called the Mahabhagavats. And so this description is a description of those who are on the platform of pure devotional service. They're always engaged, they're always pure devotees, they're never not pure devotees. But there are others, like you and me and many of us, who can render pure devotional service even though we are not yet pure devotees, 100% clean. And so what does that mean? It means I am engaged in Krishna consciousness. I am following the instructions of Srila Prabhupada as purely as he has given them, and I'm serving purely with the intention of pleasing Guru and Krishna. That's why I'm serving, and I'm a strict follower, and I'm doing my best to give Krishna consciousness to others. That's another definition of pure devotee. So your desires may not be pure, but you can serve with a pure desire. You can serve purely motivated. You can do that even when you're not yet pure. So in the purport I was quoting from Chaitanya Charitamrita when Prabhupada said the members of the Krishna consciousness movement should become pure devotees to give their association to others. That's what Prabhupada meant. You purely follow. So there's a problem. There's actually a problem in ISKCON and in many. Well, I don't want to say it's all. I don't want to say it's all pervasive, but I would say most devotees have a misunderstanding. And here's how the misunderstanding goes, according to my observation. That advanced devotees in ISKCON, such as gurus, sannyasis, and other senior devotees, are pure devotees. And everybody else is just everybody else. Or at least the everybody else might mean you. And so you could say, well, my guru is a pure devotee. There's so many pure devotees, spiritual masters, and so Maharaj. But me, I'm just me. So as far as making other people Krishna conscious or being association for others, I'm not really that good. So what I'll just try to get these people to see my spiritual master, and he will purify them. So there's nothing wrong with wanting people that you know to meet your spiritual master. But what is wrong is the understanding that you cannot be a pure devotee. That's a wrong understanding on one end, and the other end is misunderstanding the position of your spiritual master. He is engaged in pure devotional service. He is a pure devotee as long as he is following Prabhupada's instructions and purely engaged in devotional service. That doesn't mean he's seeing Krishna. That doesn't mean Krishna is speaking to him. It doesn't mean when he chants the holy name he faints. Those are higher levels of bhakti, but those are not necessarily symptoms of what we would consider pure devotional service or pure devotee, as Prabhupada's defining it as one who's following strictly his spiritual masters, fully engaged in spreading Krishna consciousness purely. The flaws you see in yourself are not the problem. The problem is when you act on those flaws. So having material desires or flaws is not a problem. It's only a problem if you engage those flaws in some way. You allow those flaws to affect your life. So you, Pallavi, if you strictly follow the program that Prabhupada has given, chanting your rounds nicely, rising early, reading his books, being clean, doing some deity worship, telling other people about Krishna, you are now engaged in pure devotional service. And by your example, you are showing what pure devotional service is. So then we can refer to you as the pure devotees that people need to associate with. And by your association, you can help them become pure devotees. So you see the two flaws. The flaw is on your end. You're thinking, no, I'm not all this. My Guru Maharaj is all this, but I'm not, so I'll bring everyone to him. And so you're seeing your spiritual master perhaps on a higher level than he is, and seeing yourself on a lower level. Now, one of my godbrothers, when he initiates his devotees, he says, I hope within 10 years you'll be initiating your own disciples. Now, if I told that to Pallavi, we wouldn't see her on chat anymore because she would just have fainted. And her husband would be taking her to the hospital right now. So I won't tell her that. But that's what he tells his disciples, because he wants them to understand that his position as a spiritual master, or his empowerment, or his purity, it's qualified, or it exists because he's serving to the best of his capacity the instructions of his spiritual master. Otherwise, he's ordinary. Otherwise, he has no special position at all. He's not. Some incarnation has fallen from the sky. What is special about him is that he's following his spiritual master purely, not motivated to gain anything. And in his heart, he wants, his desire is to give Krishna to others. So that instruction is there for all of us. We're all meant to be that way. But that's the position of the spiritual master. Now, the spiritual master may be more elevated than that personally. He may be on a much higher platform internally. But in terms of making others Krishna conscious, in terms of being a pure devotee, that's what Prabhupada means. So understanding that means, in theory, anyone who will serve Krishna with a pure motivation and strictly follow the orders of Prabhupada and give themselves fully to helping others become Krishna conscious can also become spiritual master. It doesn't have to be Diksha Guru, it could be Siksha Guru. And it doesn't even have to be officially Siksha Guru, but your association will influence people to become devotees. So we shouldn't make excuses and say, no, not me, I'm fallen. Because that's not true. You can be fallen. That may be true that you're fallen. But it's not true that you can't engage in pure devotional service, and it's not true that you can't strictly follow, if that's your intention. And it's not true that the spiritual master has to be on a super elevated platform to make other people Krishna conscious. He just has to purely want to serve his guru and Krishna and the whole disciplic succession and strictly follow. So that's what's being explained here. So Prabhupada wanted all of us to become pure devotees. And I quoted that from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And one comment I have there that's interesting is that Prabhupada wrote Chaitanya Charitamrita in 1974. I think it came out 74, 75. I think if you did a survey of ISKCON in 1974, 75, I think the average amount of time devotees were in the movement probably was not more than 2 years. If you added up all the people who joined earlier and later, by 74, 75, 2, maybe 3 years would be the average. My guess would be maybe closer to 2.5 years. So if you interviewed all the devotees, you would get, let's say, for the sake of this discussion, you would get an average about 2.5 years. The average devotee had been in the movement. And so now we look at that instruction and understand. Prabhupada's instructing that to people who on the average have been devotees a little over 2 years. And he's saying, you should become a pure devotee, and then by that pure devotional service you give your association. So in other words, that was in order to people in the movement a couple of years. So the reason I'm presenting that or explaining this is because you might think, no, well, that's not for everybody. But no, these were only devotees a couple of years. So anyway, the reality is that Prabhupada wanted us all to become spiritual master. It doesn't mean you're initiating. The spiritual master, guru, means teacher. So he wanted all of us to be teacher. And he's showing us here how we do that by giving association. So what's interesting about this section of the Jaiva Dharma is it's explaining how people become devotees. They become devotees through Sangha. And so if we are exemplary, that means we give good Sangha. And if we give good Sangha, people will become Krishna conscious. And it's not really a question of if we give good Sangha, we're supposed to give Sangha. That's part of our seva. To be Sangha for people. To be an inspiration, to be an example, to be knowledgeable enough to instruct people. These are all duties that we have, that Prabhupada has given us, because we make up the society, and the members of the society are the ones who give association, whereby it creates bhakti sukriti. And as we're reading, when people get enough of this sukriti, then everything is good. Then they can advance in Krishna consciousness, because it's just an accumulation of sukriti. So now Sandrup has a question. Is philosophical knowledge very important to preach bhakti, or just doing devotional service? We will get knowledge of this science to be effective in preaching. Both are important. And, there are many things that you read you can't understand unless you do service, and through doing service you'll understand. You could say, in a broader sense, you could say that's true for everything you learn. Because as you know, you learn so many things that don't register. They register in your head, but they don't register anywhere else, and so they don't manifest in your life. So it's the service that empowers the philosophical knowledge. Philosophical knowledge is also, one way I like to look at it, is you're at a crossroad and you don't know where to go, so you have knowledge. And knowledge will direct you, I should go this way. So it's directing us towards bhakti, but actually doing bhakti is different. And I think you also need to distinguish the difference between philosophical knowledge and knowledge of Krishna, because knowledge of Krishna is part of bhakti. So knowledge of Krishna is not wrong, or it's not detrimental, it doesn't detract us from bhakti. Philosophical knowledge, generally what it means is understanding what is Maya, what is not Maya. I'm not the body. Sometimes it's impersonal knowledge, sometimes it's knowledge. It means knowledge to free ourselves from suffering. So oftentimes the focus is on us and we're suffering and I want to get out of it. So there's some motivation there for freedom from anxiety and freedom from pain. So you get it through knowledge. Anyway, I hope you don't faint, Pallavi, but the way to understand this is Prabhupada has come and he's given us something, okay? And then he wants us to give it to others. So the way we pay him back is by giving it to others. So it's, we see it as an obligation to Prabhupada, that he's given us knowledge, and so we should take it as an obligation to give it to others. And if we're not good at giving it to others, then we take it as an obligation to in some way be involved in spreading Krishna consciousness. So, if there are any questions, ask now, otherwise I'm going to continue reading. Just wait a moment and see if you have any questions. Okay. Krishna Govinda. Well, there's no more audio because I stopped speaking. I hope that's the reason that you didn't hear. Otherwise, Haribol. Krishna Kirtan. Are you in Vrindavan? Because if you're in India, then you have you have double problems. It's being transmitted in India and received in India could be quite dangerous in terms of computer problems. So let's read. I'm going to go over a little bit what we read. So here, one associates with a Shuddha Bhakta by chance and leads to initial Shraddha. So go back to this point. Okay, Shuddha Bhakta, and then say, okay, we read here that one should associate with Shuddha Bhakta, or sometimes we call this Sadhu Sangha, but then some people argue that, there's Sat Sangha, which means association of devotees, and then there's Sadhu Sangha, which means association of sadhus, and there's a difference. But Prabhupada generally distinguished that difference, like Vishnu and Krishna. He referred to Krishna as Vishnu, Vishnu as Krishna. Sat Sangha, Sadhu Sangha. So, but here the word is used, this is the confusing point. One associates with the Shuddha Bhakta. Shuddha means pure, and by chance. And then this leads to Shraddha, wherein he gets the association of the Bhaktas the second time. So Shuddha Bhakta. And then Pallavi is thinking, well, I'm not a Shuddha Bhakta, I'm not a pure Bhakta. And Mahatma is saying, yes, you can be a pure Bhakta, and not only can you be, it's Prabhupada's desire that you be, because then when you give your association, people will begin the practice of devotional service. And so again, we go back to the concept of what's a Shuddha Bhakta, one who is fully engaged in Krishna consciousness and serving Krishna for the motive of pleasing him, not to get out of this world, not to advance materially, not to gain any power, but just to please Guru and Krishna. So then you become a Shuddha Bhakta, and then by your association, people will want to hear more and more. So it's incumbent upon all of us. It's incumbent upon all of us, because we've been asked to give Krishna consciousness to others. And what's so nice about this section is it's explaining this is how it happens. I don't know if I told this story, but it's a very interesting story. There was one devotee, he approached Prabhupada. And said, I think it would be nice if we did training in how to distribute books, and then we could, systematize it and make it very formal training. And so Prabhupada didn't like that. He said, because every man is his own genius, Krishna gives intelligence. Krishna gives intelligence to each of us individually, how we can progress in Krishna consciousness. So, Krishna will or can guide and empower any of us to be Shuddha Bhaktas. It's not like a formula, A, B, C, D, you'll get it, but it's more your mood and your desire. And so when that mood is there, when the desire is there, that's much more important than any formula you could have. Like say, well, probably this is what you should tell people. It's not as important as being more pure. That's much more important. So when they said, Prabhupada, we want to train them how to distribute books, he said that's artificial. It's a little artificial, because the real technique is your own consciousness. The real technique is who you are. If anyone's distributed books, the real technique is your desire to distribute them. That's what really makes the difference, much more than anything you say, is your desire to give the books to people. So, making people Krishna conscious is not just an external process where you educate them, but it's also who you are, and what kind of association you give people. Because the more Krishna conscious you are, the better association they get. And the better association they get, the more Krishna conscious they'll become. So Pallavi is saying here, well, I didn't understand that. I didn't know that. Well, when we joined Krishna consciousness in the early days, that was well known without even being said. It was just, we were pioneers, and so we understood Prabhupada's desire. It was very clear what he wanted. And it was very clear that in fulfilling his desires, he wanted us to be pure. Very, very clear. So let's read on, it'll make more sense. The result of the first association is Shraddha. So if someone associates with a Shuddha Bhakta, a pure devotee, they'll get faith. And then it says, the result of the first association is Shraddha, which also can be termed surrender. In other words, it's kind of like surrender, one definition of surrender. It's interesting. I was with Prabhupada in the garden, and there was one of the lawyers that was helping us. In those days, what the lawyers were doing they were fighting legal battles, particularly with airports, because we were distributing books in airports. And airports didn't want us there. But the airports are public places, so we were getting our rights, constitutional rights, of freedom of speech. So the Prabhupada was in LA, and they thought, well, let's bring this man to meet Prabhupada. And so he had, heard the philosophy from devotees, so he had some interest, and I'm sure he understood that who Prabhupada was, and this would be a special opportunity. So he asked Prabhupada a question. He said, how long does it take to be Krishna conscious? And Prabhupada said, a moment. He said, as soon as you accept Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then that's surrender. So what did Prabhupada mean? So the surrender may not be full, but the surrender that I am servant, Krishna's God, that much, that I acknowledge, I'm not the enjoyer, I'm not the controller, that much surrender. So when we say surrender, okay, there's a continuum from the beginning to the end, but the beginning stage of surrender is, I'm a servant, I'm not an enjoyer, I'm not trying to compete with Krishna anymore. So there's like this cutoff point, right? I surrender. So that's what point is being made here. You get association of bhaktas, then it builds up faith, and from that faith you'll begin doing devotional service, and then you'll want more association, so you'll get it. And then the result of that association is Shraddha. First he says, the result of first is Shraddha, but Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that Shraddha can also be termed surrender. So that story I just told you explains that okay, I believe this Shraddha, I believe Krishna's God, I believe I'm his servant. That's Shraddha, the beginning of the movement. Prabhupada was beginning to initiate devotees. Someone would say, can I get initiated through the Prabhupada? And Prabhupada would say, yes, answer some question. Say, who is Krishna? Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Who are you? I am servant of Krishna. Okay, you can be initiated tomorrow. Pretty easy, right? So what was the point? That from Prabhupada's perspective, that was a level of surrender, that I accept Krishna as God, I'm a servant. So that's what's being said here. Now, someone's knocking at the door. Should I get it or not? We won't get it, and we'll see what if they keep knocking. The result of first association is Shraddha, which can also be termed surrender. The initial sadhusanga is brought about by contact with holy places, auspicious times and paraphernalia, and recipients of Sri Hari's grace, all of which are beloved by him. These lead to faith in his shelter. So that's just reiterating what we've already discussed. Now, what was just explained is that the different steps in bhakti. As I was explaining before, when you have faith, then you'll do devotional service. That's what happens. Following faith, I say, well, there's sangha, And then from that, you do bhajana kriya. Bhajana kriya means you become serious about bhajan. Sometimes it can mean initiation. And then there's anartha nivritti. And so the next question that comes up here, he's asking a question about anarthas, but I'll answer Pallavi's question first. When I read the Bhagavad Gita, I see that I am reading it, but kind of does not stay register, and I used to think that I am not reading it attentively enough. And I would read it over and over. It would stay for a while, but not forever. So now I understand that it's because what I'm reading is registering in the mind, but not in the heart. So how do I change that? Well, we may have some resistance on some level to going further than we feel comfortable to go in Krishna consciousness. And if that's the case, then when you hear something and you consciously or subconsciously register in your mind that if I accept this fully, that means it's going to push me to do something or think in a way that I don't feel comfortable either doing or thinking. So that's one reason it may not register, just because there's a feeling of that I can't do this, or if I did it, I wouldn't be happy, or that it would be extremely difficult to do, or it would be painful, it would be uncomfortable. That's one reason. Another more obvious reason is that we're just highly conditioned, and it takes time to become purified, which is why we hear things over and over again, because sometimes it doesn't register because we're so covered. It doesn't go deep enough, So if you think of it like different levels of cleansing, you've cleansed you're taking paint off a desk, so you've got some of it off, but you have to get more. Maybe the desk has like 10 layers of paint, so if you're sanding, then you'd be sanding through these different layers of paint. So then if we rephrased your question, Pallavi would say, well, why is it that I'm sanding but I don't get to the bottom? Because there's so many layers. And so you have to keep sanding to get to the bottom. And a lot of times what's actually happening is layers are coming off, but you haven't got to the bottom, so you don't realize layers are coming off. And one day you finally hit the bottom. So there are many reasons for this. One realization that I have is that by practicing Krishna consciousness, what happens is that as you become purified, you become more committed to Krishna consciousness, you become more committed to the process, you become more desirous of advancing. And let's say you're here, like you're saying, you're hearing about something, but it's not touching your heart. The reason may be is that you don't really want to develop that, whatever it may be, quality or attitude or service. But by practicing Krishna consciousness over and over and over, you begin to develop a stronger desire to want that. Just like a lot of us don't actually want to be humble. We might intellectually say that we do, and I don't doubt anyone who says I want to be humble. I don't doubt that they want to be humble, but what I mean in the context of this discussion is like I'm sure you all want to be humble, you all want to be pure devotees, and you all want to develop so many attitudes and qualities. But when it comes down to it, are we willing to do what's necessary to be humble? Are we even willing to act humbly in all situations? And then if you look at that, the answer might be no. So it's when you are more advanced and the answer becomes yes, then when you read, it's going to register, because now you want it and you're open to it. And the reason something doesn't register that we're reading is because somehow or other it's not relatable to us. And in this case, not relatable would mean I don't want it. So it's like, if you don't want something, then reading about it, like you don't want to go to the island of Tahiti. So reading about it is just going to go in one ear and out the other, because you have no desire to go there. And it's just, for you, it just feels it's a waste of time to read anything about it. Whereas if you wanted to go to Hawaii, or better yet, Vrindavan, then reading about Vrindavan you would be very interested in, and you would get a lot out of it. And you would do what you had to do to get there. So that's my personal experience, that we may read about something, but we don't really want it for whatever reason, and it just doesn't register because it's not relevant. It's like reading a child's book. You look at it, it doesn't make, there's no relevance to you, so you don't really focus on it. And then, of course, as Sanatana Goswami, when he heard from Mahaprabhu, at the end of his listening, he said, I pray that this knowledge will go from my head to my heart. So you can pray for that also. What other reason will it stay in the head? Some people live in their heads, they don't live in their hearts. Some people may be afraid to live in their hearts, so it doesn't go there. Some people don't know how to bring knowledge into their heart. Some people don't realize they're supposed to bring it into their heart. Some people don't realize that knowledge of the Gita is meant to change your life. Some people might read it just as a ritual. I read these verses. It's a seva. It's a ritual. I do it. And it doesn't, it's just done as a rule. Well, my Guru Maharaj told me to read every day, so I read for an hour. So, okay, I read and I put the book down. So why am I reading? Because he told me to read. So I may not be connected to what I'm reading. I'm just reading out of duty. But what's being said on the pages, I may not connect to. That's possible. There may be other reasons, but since there's other questions, I'd like to answer them. There's a few things to think about. And I think probably if you ask yourself that question, you might come up with other reasons that are specific to you, why you think it's staying in your mind and not going to your heart. Sometimes it could also just be you're not doing enough service. Get some service. Well, you've got, so that could be. So Krishna Kirtan Dasi is saying, back to satsanga, some temples and leaders banish or exclude devotees who have taken shelter from gurus and devotees outside ISKCON. What is your position? Is there a nice Vaishnava? If there is a nice Vaishnava Sangha nearby, will you participate actively even if it's not only strict Prabhupada followers? Well, I think there's two ways of answering this question. One is like more internal and one is more external. So internally, I would say a devotee will have to make that decision for himself. If he appreciates that Sangha, if he feels that Sangha is favorable to cultivating his relationship with ISKCON and favorable to cultivating his service, and favorable to whatever it is he's cultivating in Krishna consciousness. So if someone feels it's favorable, then internally they may make a decision. Okay, especially if there's no temples near you and that's the only temple. There's some, and so as a, so what you're saying is, okay, here's good association. Is it bad to get good association if they're not part of ISKCON? So it could be bad, it could not be bad. How it could be bad is just here's something that's not exactly in the line of what your spiritual master is teaching and you get a little confused. It could be bad if you're coerced into becoming part of that Sangha and taking shelter of an instruction from people there that you'd rather not take shelter of. It can become bad if it disturbs relationships with other friends of yours who may not appreciate that Sangha and therefore may not appreciate you if you're going to that Sangha. Now, everyone's individual, so for some people, that's not going to be a concern. And for other people, that's going to be a big concern. So let's say you're in a good Sangha. Let's say you have a Bhakti Vriksha where you're going, or you have a Sangha. And if you go here, you know, rightly or wrongly, that people are going to react in a negative way. And maybe they won't want you in their Sangha. And then you say, if I go to this other Sangha, then I can't go to this Sangha. But this Sangha is more important than that Sangha, because that Sangha is not fundamental to my Krishna consciousness where this one is. So that's an external consideration. Then unfortunately we have to make. Now, some devotees will not make those external considerations. They'd rather not consider those things. They're not, those are not priorities. But for many devotees, working within ISKCON and getting that Sangha is their priority, and therefore they don't want to in any way jeopardize that. Now, if you take it further to the right, then you might think, well, Prabhupada didn't really direct us to work outside of ISKCON, so it's better I stay working within the society, because we don't have so many clear instructions to get Sangha outside. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's just things to think about. And not many, but certainly some devotees had problems in ISKCON because they went to gurus outside of ISKCON and it wasn't appreciated. And they were in leadership positions, and it was very, very touchy because they were exemplars and people follow them. And so they were getting some feedback that you are an example, and if you do this, many, many thousands of devotees may start going outside of ISKCON to take instruction, and some of the instruction is not exactly, it's Siddhanta, but it's maybe not exactly the way Prabhupada explained it, and it's going to create confusion. So, for yourself, that Sangha may be fine and inspiring, but according to your position in ISKCON, it could be detrimental. Or that Sangha may not be good, it may be confusing. So, my thoughts on this is that what we often see is that if somebody goes to hear from a Gaudiya Math member, many of those people become somewhat attached or associated with that organization, and that organization's aims and objectives are different than the aims and objectives. At least the specific aims and objectives are different than the aims and objectives of ISKCON. And therefore, one who wants to be extremely chaste to the aims and objectives of ISKCON, feeling that this is what Prabhupada wants them to do, would be cautious about taking Sangha in other places too closely, because, as I said, often what happens is when people do that, they end up becoming part of that organization. And that organization, although many of the things they do are what ISKCON does, many of the things they do have a different focus. And so generally for those who are very focused on Prabhupada's mission, they would not get so close. or not that, yeah, I'm just saying they wouldn't get close enough to do that. I mean, for me personally, what I have seen, I know devotees who were hopelessly fallen that were helped by gurus outside of ISKCON. And if it wasn't for those gurus outside of ISKCON, these people wouldn't be devotees. So we can't deny that that's happening. It's definitely happening. And we can't deny that there are advanced devotees outside of ISKCON. But their mission is different. And it wasn't really what Prabhupada wanted. From the instructions we got from Prabhupada, he always wanted us to work within the organization. And so, you see other organizations, they're not distributing Prabhupada's books, or they're not distributing many, they're distributing the books of their gurus. So we know in ISKCON, it's Prabhupada's books we're distributing. And Prabhupada wanted us to work collectively together under the GBC, so organizations are independent of that. And so if we want to honor Prabhupada's instruction, then we would stay in ISKCON. Now, not everybody sees it that way. And you're not going to hell if you don't. And it's not that Prabhupada wouldn't be pleased. But there are differences, and I think also, I don't know, maybe this is more than you asked, but one of the things to consider is those who have taken Sangha, especially Diksha outside, usually it's one guru with a small movement, and when he leaves, there's not a lot of infrastructure like there is in ISKCON to maintain people. So in ISKCON there's this huge infrastructure, just like Senia's in Israel, so there's a temple there. And Sushma's in Houston, so there's a temple there. And Paulu's in Edison, there's a Bhakti Riksha there. So there's all this facility. So even if they don't have association with their spiritual master, even their spiritual master leaves, either physically leaves his body or falls into Maya and leaves, they still have the organization. So, so these are things a person might think. It might think, okay, the Sangha out here is good, these are nice devotees, but there's these other ramifications. And now I've gone there, and now people are giving me a hard time. Well, I heard you went over there. What's up with you? Why'd you do that, So it's not, in ISKCON it's not, even if you went there and you got inspired, nice kirtana katha, and everything was very favorable, there'll be certain sectors of ISKCON who'll just say, he'll give you a hard time for that. Those are things you have to consider. Not only your internal position, but externally how it would affect you. And to be quite frank and honest, some of those movements have been very aggressive in canvassing people who just kind of wander over there. Maybe whose gurus have left or not initiated, and they're kind of pushed. They can be pushed quite a lot to take shelter there and take Diksha. So, something to consider. I'm not saying always it happens, but it does happen. So then Krishna Kirtan says, so it's a personal choice. We have to consider all the parameters, see if it's positive, favorable Sangha, overwhelm the weaknesses and thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's just, I've taken Sangha outside, but not a lot. And so I'm speaking with some experience, and like I said, I went to see one guru outside of ISKCON. He had come to Alachua when I was there. And then I went to see him, and there's one old friend who was having a difficult time in Krishna consciousness. And he said, I was having such a hard time, and so Maharaj, he saved me. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him. So I think many devotees have recognized that some people don't have a good place in ISKCON. And ISKCON may not give everybody exactly everything they need, and so some people, they needed this senior association, they needed to be with this person, and this person would allow them to be with them, and that's what they needed. I think the biggest problem that we've seen, and what's been most objectionable, I think, are two things, is that if you go to another organization and they downplay either your guru or the organization that you're in, or, like I said, they canvass, then it's awkward. It's not proper. But if that's not going on and you're getting inspired, then technically there's no harm. But generally, when that happens, you'll go back. You'll probably end up becoming part of that sangha, or there's a good chance you will. And that sangha may have different focus than ISKCON, so you have to consider that. So, Vatikali Radhika is asking, how do we know for certain that we're absolutely fixed in devotional service, no more ups and downs? I sometimes feel I'm finally fixed, but then a few days later I'm being very mechanical. Well, being fixed is a stage. Technically it's called Nishta, and it comes after the stage of Anartha Nibritti. And Anartha Nibritti means when the influence of anarthas is reduced, and the quantity of anarthas is reduced to such an extent that you can be steady in devotional service. So I'll give an example. You have a splinter or a piece of glass in your foot, right? And so you're limping around, and then it's taken out, and you're still limping around because there's a big cut on your foot, or there's a big wound on your foot. And so you're limping, and after a few days it hurts, but you're not limping anymore. So now you can go about your normal activities, you could even run. But it still hurts a little bit, but not enough to deter you. So Nartha Nivritti is like that, where before Nartha Nivritti, it's like you can't really walk well because it hurts too much. So in other words, if there's too many anarthas, you can't be steady. Now, to answer your question more specifically, why sometimes up, sometimes down? Well, you have that splinter was just taken out, but you get up in the morning and you walk around and it doesn't hurt so much. But then after you're walking on, it starts hurting again because it hasn't healed yet. So it's just, maybe, after sleeping and you wake up because you haven't walked on it, it doesn't feel so bad. So then you think, oh, I'm cured. But you're not cured, just haven't walked on it enough to realize that it hurts. But once it's cured, then you walk on it as much as you want and it's not going to bother you. So that's the stage of Anartha Nivritti. And that's the stage of steadiness. And so if you're not steady, it means sporadically you might be steady, but you still have much contamination that's there, and it's going to surface, and then you'll be unsteady when it surfaces, or you'll be less steady when it surfaces. If that doesn't make sense, then you can ask the question again. So welcome Palak and Leela. Pelag and Leela. Well, it's actually Pelag and Lilak, but we call them Palak and Leela. So Sene is asking, I have a question. What do you think are the most prominent reasons so many devotees around the world are struggling very much with the lower modes of nature, being dragged by it away from devotional service and unable to progress? It's MTV, it's Facebook, it's the internet, it's all of these things. Despite their effort chanting, reading, why certain people make very fast progress in devotional service, why others don't experience much change, even after so many years of chanting? Two basic reasons. I mean, I was joking about the influence, but that's the reason we have trouble. It's because we've conditioned ourselves so much. But some people are more evolved in their bhakti in this life, so it's a little easier. Some people are a little less evolved, and the ones less evolved, they're going to have to try a lot harder. And you can also say there's a level of sincerity and seriousness and commitment in different individuals. So somebody who's more committed will probably advance more. Then there's humility, someone who's humble versus someone who's proud. The person who's proud is going to struggle more. So someone who's more in an attitude of service, and another one's less in a service attitude, maybe more of the attitude that I should be served, they're going to struggle more. So it can be attitude, wrong attitude, could be impure motivation, it could be lack of sufficient sukriti to give one the determination required. But It could be one's nature to give up easily. But I would say one of the most interesting things about Krishna consciousness, which helps us become steady, and it's kind of a counterintuitive idea, is that, you see, in your question, you're saying some advance more than others. And so I was thinking about being discouraged, and you're talking about the struggles here. A higher or more advanced stage of devotional service is to not always be so concerned about how happy I am or how happy I am not in Krishna consciousness, but more concerned about pleasing Guru and Krishna. Because if I'm happy, if I'm focused on if I'm happy, that's not the right consciousness. And then if you're focused on if you're happy, you're not going to be happy. Now, another factor, another thing to factor in aside from that point is that not all chanting is equal. So, you may be chanting, I may be chanting, he may be chanting, but it doesn't mean we're all going to advance in the same way, because our chanting might be different. So you're saying, but he's doing everything, but maybe he's not doing it well or properly or enthusiastically. And I think if you ask this question to Prabhupada, he would just say Maya is very strong. And therefore you have to be serious in Krishna consciousness. I think he would just answer like that. Most prominent reason is Maya is very strong. And in that equation, if we don't fight hard enough, because Maya is strong, we don't fight hard enough, then we lose. So, let's see. Have anything else here? Yeah, good analogy. I think so, yeah. I would say, Senya. So I think this verse in Bhagavad Senayor Ubayor Madhye. That verse, you know that verse? Senayor Ubayor Madhye. Commitment is, from my observation of Prabhupada and my understanding of Krishna consciousness, you see how Prabhupada preaches, he doesn't make you feel like you can't be Krishna conscious. He doesn't say, well, look, some of you are more evolved, and we can see by the enthusiasm of these certain devotees that they were more Krishna conscious in their last life. You'd never hear him say that. You only hear him say that we're progressing one life to the next. And you never hear him say that because of your, or rarely say, because of your past activities, you can't be Krishna conscious. But you hear him say, well, anyone can chant. Anyone can take to the process, even a dog. So, commitment is a big aspect of this. Am I committed to advancing, whether or not I'm happy, whether or not things work out for me? Do I have that commitment? And so I think that's a big part of getting out of it. And am I willing to do what's right? Am I willing to correct myself as needed? Like that. So now Sushma's asking about what's wrong with being happy in Krishna consciousness. If we're happy, definitely chanting is better than when we're sad. You can be sad if it's transcendental. And if your happiness is not transcendental, then it will become detrimental. So when I was using the word happiness, I was using it in terms of motivation, not byproduct. Like the byproduct of chanting is that you're happy. But to chant to be happy is not pure devotional service. to get the happiness as a result of chanting purely, that's pure devotional service. So a lower stage of bhakti will be, I'm chanting to be happy. I want to be happy, so I'm chanting. The higher stage is, I'm chanting to please Krishna. Krishna wants to make me happy. If he doesn't, he won't. So it's all about motive. I'm not doing this just to become happy, but what Sushma is asking is that actually it's not good to be unhappy in Krishna consciousness, because then you'll probably go away. So it's important to be happy. So in that sense, Sushma, if you want to be happy because you know it's good, it'll be good for your Krishna consciousness, that your motive is to advance in Krishna consciousness. And if something else, if you say, well, if you feel being happy, makes you peaceful and it inspires you so that you can do more devotional service, then it means the motive is pure. And so your motive to be happy is not really your motive to be happy. Your motive is to advance, and being happy is how you'll advance. Like sometimes the devotee will pray, "Oh Nityananda, you're always blissful and I'm always miserable, so make me happy." Devotee might pray like that. So I think we can end here. We went over time. Unless anyone has any other questions. For you, it's early. For me, it's getting later. And for those of you who came late, we started at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We could start later now. It's daylight savings for me. We could start later. So Sani is saying, you're saying we should be happy in Krishna conscious. Does it really mean, we don't control whether we're happy or not. It's Krishna's energy. Being happy in Krishna consciousness really just means following Krishna consciousness. No, we're daylight savings time. I think she didn't probably put the Israeli time, yeah. We're daylight savings in America, so everything's an hour earlier. So Sandy's saying we don't control whether we're happy or not. That's true, but in a sense you do, because if you look at all the things you could do to make you miserable, like become attached to something that you don't want or need, or something, become attached doing something that goes against your bhakti, so that would make you miserable. So you can make yourself miserable, and then say, well, if I get up early, chant my rounds nicely, read, serve the Vaishnavas, well, what will happen? That'll make you happy. So you do have control over your happiness. So the point is, we should be happy in Krishna consciousness, not happy in Maya consciousness. That's all. There's nothing wrong with being happy as long as it's in Krishna consciousness. And here's something interesting. I wasn't giving a class, I was attending a class this week. And this was a class called The Guru in ISKCON. And so it's a class for people who want to be gurus, or people who have been approved to be gurus who have to take this class, or even for Siksha gurus or leaders. So we're having discussion about, we're having one discussion that relates to what we're discussing here, and this topic of being happy. So one devotee quoted a letter that Prabhupada wrote to one devotee, and he said that you should find out from the devotees what they want to do, what they like doing, what inspires them, and engage them in doing that. Which you might think, well, that's not pure devotional service. But that Prabhupada felt, well, that was the best way for people to advance. And he said, if you don't do that, no intelligent people will come to Krishna consciousness, because they'll just think Krishna consciousness is like a dictatorship and everyone's forced to do things they don't like doing. So you do what you like doing, but you're happy in Krishna consciousness. But it's to please Krishna. That's ultimately it's to please Krishna. So it's not, you don't want to be happy pleasing yourself. But happy pleasing Krishna, yes. And if you're not happy, generally there's something you're doing wrong. And if it's not something you're doing wrong, it's a way of thinking that's wrong. And some of us are really expert at making ourselves miserable. And we might be doing everything right in Krishna consciousness, but we have the wrong way of approaching it mentally. And we undermine any bliss we could be experiencing. So, Senya, you do control whether you're happy or not to some degree. Because you can make yourself miserable. And as you can make yourself miserable, if you're following Krishna consciousness well with the right attitude, and the right attitude is important, because if you have the wrong attitude and you follow, then you're not going to be happy. So, okay. Anything else before we go? We have gone an hour and a half. So I don't know. Palak Paneer, we started an hour and a half ago. Is that bad timing for you? We could start a half hour earlier. We could start a half hour later. So that would be, we could start 2 hours earlier, or we could start an hour earlier. So you need to tell us. And that way we can determine next week's timing. We'll give Pelag the... Well, I guess you came, I don't know, you came after, they do Harinam. So you're coming after Harinam. Everything's okay. All right. All right, so anything else? So the moral of this class, for those of you who came late, is that you all are going to become gurus. You're all meant to become Shuddha Bhaktas and give your association to other people, because Sangha is most important. Okay? Thank you all for coming. And we will see you on Tuesday night, your time. And Hare Krishna to all of you. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.